Hello everyone, my name's Sarah Gressley. This is going to be my audience tonight, my dad. Alright, so my informational speech is going to be about Edgar Allan Poe's life, and I'm going to inform you all about how he was a famous American poet, and this will focus on his childhood, his life works, and many of his achievements. So his early life and childhood is what I'm going to start with. Edgar Allan Poe was born on January 19th, 1809 in Boston, Massachusetts. Poe really never knew his parents. His mom was Elizabeth Arnold Poe, a British actress, and David Poe was his father, an actor who was born in Baltimore. His father left the family early in Poe's life, and his mother passed away from tuberculosis when he was only 3. Separated from his siblings as well, Edgar went to live with John and Frances Valentine Allen. John was a successful tobacco merchant, and his wife was just a housewife in Richmond, Virginia. By the age 13, Poe was already a prolific poet. But his literary talents were discouraged by his foster father, John, who preferred the tobacco industry, but Poe reportedly wrote poems on the back of Allen's business papers as spite. His education, he went to the University of Virginia in 1826, where he excelled in his classes. However, he didn't receive enough funds from Allen to cover all his costs. Poe turned to gambling to cover the difference, but he ended up in debt. Edgar's fiancée, Sarah Almira Royster, had become engaged to someone else while he attended UVA. He was heartbroken and frustrated, so Poe moved back to his birth city, Boston. And fun fact is they have preserved the room at UVA that he stayed in, and you can still go and visit it. His early career while in Boston, Poe published his first book, Tamburlaine and Other Poems, and that was in 1827. Poe published a second poetry collection, Al Arf Tamburlaine and Minor Poems, in 1829. Shortly after Allen, Edgar's foster father, helped him get appointed to West Point Military Academy. Poe excelled in his studies at West Point, but was kicked out after a year for not completing all of his duties. During his midlife, after leaving West Point, Poe put all his focus on his writing career. He traveled around in search of opportunities, living in New York City, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Richmond. In 1834, when Poe was 25, his foster father John Allen died, and he left Poe out of his will. Poe got a break when one of his short stories won a contest in the Baltimore Saturday Visitor, and that's when he began to publish many short stories, and in 1835, he landed an editorial position with the Southern Literary Messenger in Richmond. During this time, Poe also began to devote his attention to his young cousin Virginia, who became one of his literary inspirations as well as his love interest. The couple married in 1836 when she was only 13 years old and Poe was 27. At the Southern Literary Messenger, Poe developed a reputation as a cutthroat critic. His aggressive reviewing style strained his relationship with the publication, and he eventually left the magazine in 1837. Poe wrote briefly at Burton's Gentleman's Magazine, Graham's Magazine, the Broadway Journal, and he also sold his work to Alexander's Weekly Messenger, among other journals. Despite his success and popularity as a writer, Poe struggled financially as he advocated for higher wages for writers. Many of Edgar's greatest works were published in 1837, including his most famous poem, The Raven. A fun fact is that originally Poe wanted to use a parrot instead of a raven, but he thought it didn't evoke the right tone. as well as many of his short stories such as The Telltale Heart and The Fall of the House of Usher and The Black Cat were published late in his life. Late in his life, 12 years after they married, Virginia died of tuberculosis. Poe's short story, The Mask of Red Death, was inspired by Virginia's illness. While singing for the family, Virginia's lungs hemorrhaged and she began bleeding from the mouth. While in denial about the severity of Virginia's illness, Poe wrote the story about Prince Prospero trying to keep the disease from his castle. Poe was given $1,500 the last week of his life to start a magazine. In his life, he was plagued by international copywriters before copyright laws were introduced, and in many ways he paved the way for writers to be compensated enough to have a career. In 1849, Poe was found disoriented, wandering the streets of Baltimore in clothes that weren't even his. He was hospitalized 4 days, but was never coherent enough to explain how he ended up that way before he died. All medical records about his death have been lost, so the cause remains a mystery. Speculation has included heart disease, meningeal inflammation, rabies, epilepsy, and syphilis. Overall, Edgar Allan Poe is an American poetry icon and is still considered the best poet by many. Many people didn't know Edgar was surrounded by death for most of his life, and that inspired many of his short stories and poems that he wrote. He's just amazing. And some more fun facts is that the Baltimore Ravens, the football team, was named after his famous poem, The Raven. He was the first to use the term short stories. He often wrote with his cat on his shoulder, and apparently his ghost continued writing after his death through a medium. Edgar Allan Poe was an amazing poet that still his stories go on today. I mean, I've read most of his short stories and poems throughout my education, and I continue to remember everything. It's like all the quotes and everything. He uses a lot of alliteration, and his poems and his short stories will live on in the future. They will not go away. Alright, well, that's all I have for you about the iconic Edgar Allan Poe. So, thank you. Good night.